It was a calm evening, the kind that made the streets look like they were resting after a long day. The sun had already gone down, leaving a soft orange glow over the highway lights. Cars passed now and then, not too fast, not too slow. Everything seemed normal until a black SUV appeared from the curve of the road, steady and clean, driven by a man who looked like he was on his way home from work. He was dressed neatly, his hand steady on the steering wheel, his eyes focused straight ahead. Behind him, a police car followed for a moment. Inside it sat Officer Daniels, a man who had been in the job for almost 10 years. He had seen all kinds of people, all kinds of situations, and he thought he could read a person just by looking at them. But that was the problem. He wasn't really reading people. He was judging them. And tonight, something about that black SUV made him uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. The man wasn't speeding, he hadn't broken any traffic law. Still, Daniels felt that urge, that little voice in his head telling him to check it out. He reached for his radio, muttered something about a potential suspicious vehicle, and then flicked on his siren. The sharp blue and red lights filled the quiet air. The SUV slowed, blinkers flashing, and gently pulled over to the side of the road. Daniels parked right behind it and stepped out, adjusting his belt. He placed his hand on his holster without thinking much about it, his steps slow and firm. Inside the SUV, the man sighed quietly. He had been through this before, not this exact situation, but ones that felt similar. He knew the routine, and he knew that staying calm was the best thing to do. He lowered the window halfway, kept both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. Daniels approached the car from the driver's side, his flashlight in hand even though there was still enough light to see clearly. The beam of the light swept across the inside of the SUV, the dashboard, the seats, the man's face. "License and registration," Daniels said in a voice that was more command than request. The man nodded slowly. "Sure, officer. My license is in my inside pocket, and the registration is in the glove box. May I reach for them?" His voice was calm, measured, respectful. Daniels didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his hand still close to his weapon. For a moment he stared at the man, trying to decide what kind of person he was. He didn't see a nervous driver or a threat, but something in him still didn't relax. It wasn't logic. It was a feeling. He gave a small nod. "Go ahead," he said, his tone still sharp. The man moved slowly, keeping his eyes on Daniels as he reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He handed over the license, then leaned forward to open the glove compartment. The officer's flashlight followed his every movement, bouncing off the car interior. The man passed over the registration papers as well, and Daniels took them, stepping slightly back. For a moment, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the low hum of distant cars. Daniels studied the ID under the beam of his flashlight. Everything looked fine. The name, the address, the expiration date. Nothing seemed off, but he still didn't lower his guard. "What are you doing out here tonight?" he asked, his tone more like an interrogation than casual conversation. "Just heading home from work," the man replied. "It's been a long day." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Work? Where do you work?" The man hesitated for a moment, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he could feel where the tone of this talk was going. Still, he replied politely. "I work for the government," he said simply. Something about that answer made Daniels tense. He didn't ask which department or what role. He just felt a strange mix of doubt and challenge. He had seen people try to use fancy titles before to avoid trouble. He took a step closer. "The government, huh?" he said slowly. "You got proof of that?" The man turned his head slightly, meeting the officer's eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only patience. "Not on me, officer, but I can call my office if that helps." Daniels didn't like the sound of that. He thought the man was trying to act smart, trying to control the situation. He stepped back and spoke into his radio, calling for backup. The voice on the other end responded calmly, saying another unit was a few minutes away. The man inside the SUV stayed quiet, hands still on the steering wheel. It felt like time had slowed down. The lights from the police car flashed against the trees, painting everything in red and blue. The road was empty except for the two vehicles, and the air was heavy with tension. Daniels stood with his hand near his holster, his thoughts racing faster than his heartbeat. He didn't know what to believe, his instincts or the calm man sitting quietly before him. After what felt like forever, another police car arrived. Two officers stepped out, one of them asking Daniels what was going on. He explained quickly, saying he was conducting a stop for suspicious behavior. The other officer gave a small nod, though it was clear he didn't see much reason for concern. The man in the SUV watched them quietly. He could feel his patience being tested, but he stayed composed. When Daniels returned to his window, he spoke softly. "Officer, may I please make a quick phone call?" Daniels frowned. "Why?" "To inform my office that I'm being stopped," the man said. "It's standard procedure for me when I'm on official duty." Daniels hesitated. Something about the word official made him pause. He looked at the other officers. One of them shrugged, leaving the decision to him. Finally, Daniels said, "Fine, make it quick. Keep your hands where I can see them." The man nodded, slowly reaching for his phone. He dialed a number and waited. His voice remained calm and clear. "This is Reed," he said into the phone. "I've been pulled over by local law enforcement. Please confirm my status." Daniels felt a chill run through him. The man's tone was different now, steady, confident, like someone used to being in command. The officers glanced at each other, unsure what was happening. Through the phone's speaker, a woman's voice came through, formal and firm. "Yes, sir. This is the Pentagon Operations Center. Are you safe?" The moment those words were spoken, silence fell over the scene. Daniels blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. The man wasn't bluffing. He wasn't pretending. He was exactly who he said he was, someone important, someone who didn't need to prove himself to a highway cop. Daniels' hand dropped from his holster. His throat felt dry, and for the first time that night he was the one who didn't know what to say. The man inside the SUV ended the call calmly and looked up at him again, his expression unreadable. "Officer," he said quietly, "is there anything else you need from me?" Daniels shook his head slowly. "No, sir," he managed to say. He stepped back, suddenly aware of how wrong his assumptions had been. The other officers looked at him, waiting for instructions. Daniels swallowed hard, then cleared his throat. "You can go ahead, sir. Sorry for the inconvenience." The man nodded once, started the engine, and drove off smoothly into the dark, leaving the flashing lights behind. For a long while after that, Daniels stood on the side of the road, staring down the empty highway. The night was quiet again, but his thoughts weren't. He knew something inside him had just shifted. He had drawn his weapon, acted on instinct, and nearly humiliated someone who had done nothing wrong. The realization sat heavy in his chest. He looked down at his hands, then back at the road where the SUV had disappeared. For the first time in his career, he didn't feel proud of his badge. He just felt small and deeply uncertain about the man he had become. The next morning, Officer Daniels woke up earlier than usual. The memory of the night before stayed heavy in his mind, like a weight he couldn't shake off. The sun had just started to rise, its light barely cutting through the gray clouds. He sat at the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at the floor, thinking about everything that had happened. He kept seeing that man's calm face in his mind, the way he didn't argue, didn't panic, just handled the situation with quiet control. And then those words replayed again and again. "This is the Pentagon Operations Center." It had hit him harder than anything before. He had acted out of fear, not duty. He got ready for work without saying much to anyone. His uniform felt tighter, heavier somehow. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he didn't see the confident officer he once was. He saw someone who had made a serious mistake, one that could not be erased just because he said sorry. Still, he hoped the whole thing might blow over. Maybe the man wouldn't file a complaint. Maybe no one higher up would find out. But deep down, Daniels knew it wasn't going to be that simple. When he arrived at the station, the usual chatter filled the air. Officers laughed, sipped coffee, shared stories about the night shift. Daniels walked past them without saying a word. He could feel their eyes on him. Maybe it was his imagination, but he thought they already knew. He went straight to his desk and started filling out routine paperwork, trying to look busy. A few minutes later, his captain called him into the office. The tone of the captain's voice told him this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Daniels took a deep breath and stepped inside. The captain sat behind the desk, his face serious, a manila folder open in front of him. "Close the door," the captain said quietly. Daniels obeyed. The captain leaned back, crossing his arms. "You had a stop last night. A man driving a black SUV, you remember that?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Well," the captain continued, "we got a call early this morning. That man you pulled over wasn't just anyone. He's a high-ranking official with military clearance. Apparently, the Pentagon called the mayor's office directly. They want a full report on what happened. Daniels felt his stomach twist. He didn't say anything. The captain's eyes stayed locked on him, unreadable but sharp. "I watched your body cam footage," the captain said after a pause. "You didn't handle that stop right. You drew your weapon for no reason. The man did everything right. Kept his hands visible, followed your orders, stayed calm. And you still treated him like a suspect." Daniel swallowed hard. "I thought..." "That's the problem," the captain interrupted. "You thought... You didn't observe. You didn't assess. You let your own bias do the talking." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Daniel shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly together. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't personal, that he was just trying to stay safe. But every excuse sounded weak in his mind before it even reached his lips. Finally, the captain sighed and leaned forward. "You're suspended until further notice. Internal Affairs will review this, and the Pentagon's office might want to speak to you directly." Daniels felt his heart sink. He nodded slowly, unable to meet the captain's eyes. The captain's tone softened a little. "Look, Daniels, you've been on the force for years. You've done good work. But you've got to face what happened. This isn't just about policy, it's about judgment." Daniels left the office quietly. The walk to his locker felt longer than usual. He removed his badge and sidearm, placing them gently inside the locker. The sound of the door closing echoed in the room. He sat on the bench for a moment, staring at his hands, feeling more lost than ever. That afternoon, he drove home with the radio off. The silence in the car matched the silence in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the man in the SUV. Who was he really? What did he think of Daniels now? Did he see him as just another reckless cop? Or did he understand it was fear and not hate that pushed Daniels to act that way? When he got home, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, kids riding bikes, people walking dogs. Everything looked normal, but inside, Daniels felt like the world had shifted. He wondered how many people had gone through what that man did, pulled over, questioned, treated with suspicion, for no reason other than someone's assumptions. Days passed slowly. The department told him not to come in until the review was done. He had too much time to think. He spent hours replaying that night, questioning his own choices. For the first time, he began to really see what others had been talking about for years. How easy it was for prejudice to slip into action without even realizing it. He had never thought of himself as biased. He believed he treated everyone fairly. But now he couldn't deny that somewhere deep inside he had let fear shape his decisions. One morning, Daniels received a call. It was from the same captain. The tone this time was different, calmer but firm. "There's a meeting tomorrow," the captain said. "You're expected to attend. The man you pulled over will be there too. He asked to speak to you directly." Daniels froze for a moment, unsure what to say. "He asked for me?" "Yes," the captain replied. "He didn't file a complaint. He just said he wants to talk." The next day, Daniels arrived at the city building where the meeting was set to take place. His stomach felt heavy. He walked through the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly. Inside a conference room, a few people were seated around a long table. Among them was the man he had pulled over. He looked calm, composed, wearing the same kind of quiet confidence Daniels remembered. When their eyes met, Daniels felt a mix of guilt and relief. The man gave a polite nod, acknowledging him. A city official began by summarizing the incident, then turned to the man. "Sir, you requested this meeting. You have the floor." The man looked around the table, then spoke in a voice that carried both strength and kindness. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," he began. "What happened that night could have gone very differently. I've seen those moments turn tragic. But I also believe people can change if they're willing to learn." He paused, glancing at Daniels. "I've been serving this country for over 20 years. I've worked with people from every background. I've learned that the uniform doesn't make the person. The choices do." Daniels listened closely, feeling every word like it was directed straight at him. The man continued, "What I want isn't revenge or headlines. I want awareness. I want training. I want officers to see the human being before they see the threat." The room was silent. Everyone could feel the weight of his words. After a moment, Daniels spoke, his voice low but sincere. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was wrong. I let fear take over. I thought I was being cautious, but I wasn't. I was being unfair, and I see that now." The man nodded. "Acknowledging it is the first step. The next step is to do something about it." By the end of the meeting, the man suggested a plan. He offered to help the department develop a new training session focused on empathy and bias awareness. Surprisingly, the captain agreed to it. Daniels didn't know if it was guilt or a sense of duty, but he volunteered to be part of it too. In the following weeks, Daniels spent time working alongside the man he had once treated with suspicion. They talked not about the incident, but about life, work, people, and perspective. Daniels learned things he had never considered before, stories that made him realize how differently the world could look depending on where you stood. Every day felt like a small step toward something better. It didn't erase the past, but it gave it meaning. Daniels still wore the uniform, but he wore it differently now. He looked people in the eye. He listened more. He questioned his instincts before acting on them. And sometimes late at night, he'd think back to that quiet road, the flashing lights, and the calm voice on the other end of that phone. And he would whisper a small thank you to the man who taught him one of life's hardest lessons. That true strength doesn't come from power, but from humility. Weeks passed, and the training sessions became a regular part of the department's routine. Every Wednesday morning, officers would gather in the briefing room, coffee cups in hand, some curious, others skeptical. The sessions were led by the same man Daniels had once pulled over, though now they spoke on friendly terms. He had a quiet way of commanding the room, not through force but through calm authority. He didn't lecture or blame. He told stories, real stories, stories of people misunderstood, stories of fear, and stories of small kindnesses that changed lives. At first, many of the officers didn't take it seriously. They treated it like another box to tick, another department requirement. But slowly, something began to shift. The man's words had a way of slipping past walls people didn't even know they had built. He would describe situations where assumptions had led to disaster, and others where empathy had saved lives. He reminded them that their job wasn't just to enforce the law, but to protect the community, even the ones they didn't understand. Daniel sat near the front every time. He didn't speak much, but he listened carefully. He took notes, asked questions when he didn't understand something, and volunteered when they needed role-playing examples. The first few times felt awkward, but soon it became second nature. For the first time in years, he felt like he was learning what being an officer really meant. One day, after a particularly long session, the man asked Daniels to stay behind. The room emptied out, leaving only the two of them. The man smiled faintly. "You've changed," he said softly. "I can see it." Daniels hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I guess I had to," he said. "After that night, I couldn't keep pretending everything I did was right." The man nodded. "That's the thing about mistakes. They don't have to define you. They can guide you if you let them." Daniels looked down for a moment, then met his gaze again. "You know, I keep thinking about that night. I keep asking myself why I reached for my gun. I think I was afraid. Not of you, but of being wrong, of losing control." The man smiled gently. "Fear makes people do strange things. The goal isn't to stop feeling it, it's to understand it." That conversation stayed with Daniels. It made him think about his own life, not just his job. He started noticing how often fear and judgment shaped his choices outside of work too. How he crossed the street when he saw certain people. How he avoided conversations that challenged his beliefs. It wasn't about being a bad person. It was about being unaware. And awareness, he realized, was the first step toward change. As the weeks turned into months, Daniels began taking part in community outreach programs. He started visiting local schools with a few other officers, talking to students about safety, respect, and understanding. The first time he stood in front of a classroom full of kids, he was nervous. He wasn't used to being the one teaching lessons about fairness. But when he told them about how important it was to treat everyone equally, he meant every word. After one of these visits, a little boy came up to him and said, "My dad says police don't like people like us. Is that true?" The question hit Daniels harder than he expected. He knelt down to the boy's level and said, "That's not true, son. My job is to protect you, all of you, and I'm learning to be better at it every day." The boy smiled. And that simple moment meant more to Daniels than any medal he had ever received. Back at the department, not everyone welcomed the changes. Some officers rolled their eyes at the new training. A few thought it was unnecessary or political. One afternoon in the break room, Daniels overheard two colleagues talking. "All this empathy stuff," one of them said, shaking his head. "It's going to get someone hurt one day. We're cops, not social workers." The other nodded in agreement. Daniels didn't jump in right away. He thought about it for a moment, then spoke calmly. "You're right, we're cops. But being a cop doesn't mean forgetting you're human. If we can't understand people, how are we supposed to protect them?" The room went quiet. No one argued. They just went back to their coffee, but Daniels noticed that later, those same officers started paying more attention during the sessions. One evening, Daniels found himself sitting at the same diner he used to visit after late shifts. He hadn't been there in months. The place hadn't changed. The same red booths, the same smell of coffee and fried food. He sat at the counter thinking. That night, the man who had changed his life walked in too. They were both surprised to see each other. "Mind if I join you?" the man asked. "Not at all," Daniels replied, motioning to the seat beside him. They ordered coffee and talked like old friends. The conversation wasn't about work. It was about life, family, and small things that made people who they were. At one point, Daniels said, "You know, it's strange. The night I stopped you, it was the worst moment of my career. But now I think it might have been the best thing that ever happened to me." The man smiled. Sometimes the hardest lessons come disguised as mistakes. They sat there for a long time just talking. It wasn't about guilt anymore, it was about understanding. Daniels realized he no longer saw this man as someone above him, or different from him. He just saw him as another person who had taught him something valuable. A few months later, the department held a small ceremony to recognize community partners who had helped improve police relations. The man was one of the speakers, and when he took the stage, he spoke not about awards or success, but about growth. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, looking out at the crowd. "It happens one heart at a time, one decision at a time. It happens when someone chooses to listen instead of react." Daniels listened from the front row, feeling a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. When it was over, the man walked up to him and shook his hand firmly. "You did the hard part," he said. "You faced yourself." That night, as Daniels drove home, the city lights glowed softly through the windshield. He rolled down the window, letting the cool air in. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he finally understood what needed to change, and that change had to start with him. In the months that followed, the relationship between the police and the community began to improve slowly. People started to see the department differently. Complaints dropped and respect grew on both sides. Daniels became known not as the officer who made a mistake, but as the one who helped rebuild trust. It wasn't about fame or forgiveness, it was about doing what was right. One night, as Daniels prepared to leave for his shift, he looked at his badge on the table. It used to feel like a symbol of authority. Now it felt like a reminder of responsibility. He picked it up, pinned it to his uniform, and looked in the mirror. This time he didn't see the man from that night on the highway. He saw someone new. Someone who understood that real strength comes not from control but from compassion. Outside, the city was alive again. Cars moving, people laughing, life going on. Daniels stepped into his patrol car, turned on the radio, and smiled faintly as he pulled onto the road. Somewhere out there, someone might need his help. And this time, he would see them for who they truly were. A person just like him. Months later, life had settled into a calmer rhythm for Daniels. He had grown into someone different, someone people looked at with quiet respect. But even though he felt more at peace, there were still moments that reminded him how fragile trust could be. The department had made great progress, and yet, old habits died hard. Some officers still carried their doubts, and some citizens still carried their fears. One afternoon, Daniels was assigned to a new community outreach project. It was a partnership between local schools, neighborhood leaders, and the police department. The goal was simple: to build bridges. There would be small events, open talks, and joint activities to show that police and the public could work together, instead of standing on opposite sides. Daniels was asked to help organize the first meeting. He said yes immediately. The event took place in the gym of a small high school. Folding chairs were set in neat rows. A table at the front held a few microphones and a banner that read, "Community Connection." Parents, students, and a few officers filled the room. Daniel stood near the side watching the crowd gather. He saw hesitation in some faces, uncertainty about whether this was just another show or something real. He understood that feeling. Trust wasn't built in a day. It was earned one honest moment at a time. The man who had once been the stranger in the black SUV also arrived, still working closely with the department. He walked up to Daniels, offering a friendly nod. "You ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I can be," Daniels replied, smiling a little. "I just hope people see that we mean it this time." When the event began, the principal gave a short welcome speech, followed by a few words from community leaders. Then Daniels was invited to speak. He stood behind the microphone, his palms slightly damp. Looking out at the room, he saw people of all ages, students, teachers, parents, officers, all waiting. He cleared his throat softly. "I used to think that wearing this uniform was enough to show people who I was," he began. "But I learned that it's not the badge that earns trust, it's how we treat others. I made mistakes and I had to face them. But what matters is that we try to learn, to listen, and to be better." The room stayed quiet, every word sinking in. He continued, "This job isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about protecting hearts, lives, and families. It's about knowing that every person we meet has a story just like we do, and if we forget that, we lose the meaning of this uniform." A soft round of applause followed. Daniel stepped back, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. The man from the Pentagon took the stage next and spoke about the importance of understanding and communication. He reminded everyone that real progress wasn't built through speeches but through everyday actions. After the event, a group of students approached Daniels. One of them, a young girl with bright eyes, said, "Officer, my dad told me not to trust the police, but you seem different." Her honesty caught him off guard. He smiled gently and said, "Your dad's right to want you safe, and I'll do my best to prove that you can trust us." The girl nodded, her expression softening. Moments like that reminded Daniels why change mattered. He stayed behind to help clean up, chatting with parents and volunteers. People seemed more open now, more willing to talk. He knew it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. Later that evening, as Daniels was heading to his car, the man walked up beside him. "You did good today," he said. Daniels smiled. "It felt good. For the first time, I think I really believe what I'm saying." "That's because you've lived it," the man replied. "You've seen both sides now. That's what makes your voice matter." They parted ways with a handshake, both quietly proud of how far things had come. But life has a way of testing growth. About 2 weeks later, Daniels was on patrol when a call came in about a disturbance near a convenience store. 2 young men were reportedly arguing loudly outside. Dispatch mentioned that one might have been holding something that looked like a weapon. Daniels drove toward the scene with his partner, heart steady but alert. When they arrived, he saw 2 young men standing near the store's entrance. One looked angry, the other defensive. A small crowd had started to gather at a distance, watching. Daniel stepped out of the car, his partner following behind. "Evening, fellas," he called calmly. "Let's keep things easy here." The angry one pointed at the other. "He tried to start something with me." The other shook his head quickly. "I didn't." He thought I was filming him, but I wasn't. Daniels raised his hand slightly, his voice calm and steady. "All right, nobody's in trouble. Let's just talk this out." He noticed a shiny object in one of the young men's hands. It wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. For a moment, the scene reminded him of that night months ago. The flashing lights, the fear, the uncertainty. Only this time he was on the other side of it. He took a slow breath and said, "Let's all step back for a second. No one's pointing fingers. We'll figure it out." The tension began to ease. The young men lowered their voices. The crowd relaxed, and within minutes, what could have turned into something worse was resolved with calm conversation. Daniels wrote a brief report, noting that no one was harmed and no crime had been committed. His partner glanced at him as they got back in the car. "You handled that really well," he said. Daniels gave a small smile. "A few months ago, I might have handled it differently." He drove in silence for a while, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Growth wasn't loud, it was quiet, slow, and personal. It happened in small decisions like choosing to listen before judging, to speak calmly instead of shouting, to see a person instead of a problem. That night, Daniels went home feeling something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. He sat on his porch again, the same place where he had once questioned everything. The sky was clear, stars scattered above him, the air soft and cool. He thought about how one night, one mistake, had turned into a lesson that changed his entire life. The next morning, the department held another training session, this time led by both Daniels and the man from the Pentagon. They spoke together about their shared experience, how a moment of misunderstanding had turned into a partnership for change. Officers listened closely. Some nodded. Some even asked questions about how they could handle situations better in the field. When the session ended, the captain pulled Daniels aside. "You've done good work," he said. "You're not the same officer you used to be." "Keep going, you're setting an example." Daniels nodded, humbled. "I'm just trying to make it right," he said. Over time, Daniels became a mentor for younger officers. He would tell them, "The badge gives you authority, but respect, you have to earn that. Don't just protect the law, protect the people." And when they asked why he cared so much, he would simply say, "Because someone once gave me a chance to be better." Months later, he ran into the same man again at a charity event. They laughed, shared stories, and talked about how far things had come. The man looked at him thoughtfully and said, "You know, maybe that night happened for a reason. Maybe it was meant to start something bigger." Daniels smiled. "If it did, I'm glad it happened." That night, as the event ended, Daniels stood outside under the city lights thinking about the journey. He had gone from fear to understanding, from judgment to empathy. He knew there would always be challenges, but he also knew he was no longer the man who had once stood trembling with a gun on a quiet road. He looked up at the sky, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and walked away with a heart lighter than it had been in years. The world wasn't perfect, but for the first time, he truly believed it could be better, one honest heart at a time. A year had passed since that unforgettable night. The city had changed in small but powerful ways, and so had Daniels. His name had quietly become known around the department as someone people could talk to, someone who listened. He was no longer seen as just another cop trying to climb ranks. He had become a voice of calm reason, a man who understood that every badge carried not just duty, but also the responsibility to care. He had started visiting schools more often, spending time with kids who didn't trust officers. He didn't come in uniform most days. He'd wear simple clothes, sit in classrooms, and talk about life, respect, and choices. The kids liked that he spoke plainly, not like a cop trying to lecture them, but like a man who had seen the world from both sides. One afternoon, after finishing a session at a community center, Daniels received a call from his captain. "We've got something big," the captain said. "A federal delegation is coming next week to observe our outreach program. They're considering funding similar efforts across the country. They specifically asked for you to speak." Daniels froze for a second. "Me?" "Yes, you. You're the reason this program even got noticed. They want to hear your story, the truth, not the polished version." He felt both honored and nervous. Speaking to a room full of officials was one thing, but sharing his personal journey, the night that had nearly ended his career and changed his life, was something else. Still, he knew he couldn't turn it down. That story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had learned something from it. Over the next few days, he worked on what he would say. He didn't write a speech. He wanted to speak from the heart, the same way he had spoken that night in the high school gym. He practiced in front of the mirror, his reflection reminding him how far he had come. He saw strength now, not just in his posture, but in his eyes. The morning of the event arrived. The department's main hall had been set up with rows of chairs, a small stage, and a projector screen behind it displaying the words "Building Bridges," a new chapter in law enforcement. Daniels sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly while the captain gave opening remarks. Then came his turn. As he walked to the stage, the room fell silent. Cameras flashed. People leaned forward. He took a deep breath and began. "About a year ago," he said, "I thought I knew everything about this job. I thought that following procedure and doing what I was trained to do was enough. But one night I learned how wrong I was." He told them everything, how fear had clouded his judgment, how bias had whispered in his ear without him realizing it, how a man's calm words had shaken him more than any gun ever could. He spoke about shame, growth, and forgiveness. He didn't try to sound heroic. He spoke with honesty, the kind that made people quiet because they could feel the truth. "I was lucky," he said. Lucky that the man I pulled over didn't lose his temper. Lucky that he chose understanding instead of anger. And lucky that I was given a second chance to make things right. But not everyone gets that chance. That's why we have to do better, every one of us. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then slowly people began to clap. Not the polite kind of applause, but the kind that came from genuine respect. The captain patted his shoulder as he stepped down. "You did it," he said softly. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, a woman from the federal delegation approached him. "Officer Daniels," she said, "your story will change policies. We need more people like you in leadership. Would you consider helping us design a national training program?" He blinked in surprise. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she smiled. "The country needs your perspective." It was overwhelming, but he knew it was right. "All right," he said quietly. "If it means making a difference, I'll do it." In the weeks that followed, Daniels began traveling to different cities. He met officers, community leaders, and even families who had lost loved ones in tragic encounters. He didn't come as an expert, but as someone who understood both the weight of the badge and the fragility of trust. His workshops weren't about rules, they were about hearts. At one event in another state, he stood before a group of young recruits. "You'll face moments that test who you are," he told them. "And in those moments, you'll have to choose between fear and understanding. Remember, power isn't in how loud your voice is, it's in how you use your silence." The recruits listened carefully. Some nodded. Others wiped tears quietly. It was clear that his story resonated far beyond his city. But even as his work grew, Daniel stayed humble. He still drove his old patrol route when he could, checking in on familiar streets, waving at kids, and chatting with store owners. The man from the Pentagon would sometimes call to check in, laughing as he said, "You've turned into quite the symbol of change, you know." Daniels would laugh too. "I'm just trying to be better than I was yesterday." One day, as he was driving home from a training seminar, he stopped at a small diner. It was the same diner he had visited once after that fateful night, when he was lost and searching for clarity. The same waitress recognized him and smiled. "Long time no see, officer." "You look lighter," he chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am." He sat by the window sipping coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. He thought about how much had changed in 1 year, how fear had turned into purpose, how guilt had turned into growth. He realized that forgiveness wasn't something others had to give him. It was something he had to give himself. Before leaving, he paid his bill and left a small note on the napkin. "Thank you for the coffee that night. It meant more than you knew." Driving home, he passed by the same stretch of road where it had all begun, the place where his life had changed. He slowed down, pulling over for a moment. The memories were still vivid, but they no longer hurt. Instead, they felt like lessons carved deep into his heart. He looked out at the darkening sky and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know exactly who he was thanking, maybe fate, maybe that man, maybe life itself, but he meant it. That night, back at home, Daniel sat at his desk and began writing. Not a report this time, but something personal. He wrote about fear, redemption, and the power of listening. He wrote about how real courage wasn't about standing tall, but about admitting when you're wrong. He titled it simply, "The Road Back." He didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but it felt right to put it down. The words flowed easily, honest and raw. It was as if he was finally setting down the weight he'd carried for so long. When he finished, he leaned back and smiled softly. Life had come full circle. He wasn't trying to erase the past anymore, he was honoring it, because it had made him who he was. The next morning, he received an email from the Pentagon. They wanted him to come speak at a national law enforcement conference, this time not as a guest, but as a featured speaker. The man who had once been pulled over had recommended him personally. Daniels closed the email and let out a long breath. He didn't feel pride. He felt peace. He stepped outside, the morning sun warm on his face. The world was the same as it had always been, busy, imperfect, unpredictable, but his heart was steady now. He knew that every moment, every choice mattered. As he got into his car, he thought about what he would say at that conference. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Start with the truth. Always the truth." Then he turned the key, the engine humming softly, and drove forward into the next chapter of his life, one that would inspire others the way he had once been inspired to change himself.